Just one comment from a friend put me in the toughest position: stay silent or protect my 18-year-old cousin from harassment. What I did next could destroy a long-standing friendship and change the way I see my friends forever. And this is my story. Asterisk, I never thought a quiet weekend at home could become the sort of story you'd tell in fragments. The kind people share late at night with a mixture of disbelief and admiration for someone's choices. But here I am, sitting in the silence of my living room, replaying every little moment, every detail that led up to it, trying to understand how ordinary life can spiral into the extraordinary in just a single evening. I'm 25. My fiancée Sophia is 20. We've been together since we were 20, practically growing up side by side, learning the rhythm of life together, sharing laughter and small heartbreaks. Sophia is from Ukraine, and there's a softness to her that comes from the way she carries her roots. She's gentle but firm, a grounding presence in my otherwise chaotic world. She has this way of looking at someone that makes them feel understood, even if they don't speak the same words. Then there's Alina, my second cousin. She's 18 now, half Russian, half American, and she carries herself with a quiet elegance that belies her age. I remember when Sophia first introduced us during Thanksgiving years ago. They clicked immediately. It wasn't just the shared language, though that helped, it was the rhythm of their minds. Their shared love for cooking, for church, for little traditions that neither of them had left behind despite living so far from home. Alina lost her mother a few years ago, and since then, she's relied on our little family more than I can express. There's a vulnerability to her, a kind of quiet trust she places in us that makes me feel protective, almost instinctively. In some ways, I feel responsible for her happiness, for her sense of safety. And I know Sophia feels the same way. The bond they share is beyond casual friendship. It's the kind of connection that forms when two people navigate loss together and find solace in each other. Our neighborhood is quiet, suburban. Not many Slavic families around, which makes the little traditions we cling to even more precious. Thanksgiving dinners, shared recipes, trips to the local bakery for bread that tastes like home, long talks over tea. These small rituals are the glue that binds us, making our home feel like a place of belonging. It's a world we've built together, one of warmth, laughter, and understanding. And then there's me. I like to think of myself as easygoing, but I'm fiercely protective of the people I care about. I like to think I understand boundaries, though I've learned over time that knowing them and enforcing them are two very different things. It's one thing to laugh and joke with friends, another entirely to see someone you care about exposed to discomfort, danger, or unwanted attention. On that particular weekend, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Sophia and Alina decided to take a drive to a small bakery a few hours away. They were on a mission for Borodinsky bread, a recipe that Sophia insisted they could never replicate at home. It was the kind of mundane errand that I, for one, appreciated. Quiet moments like that allow me to catch up on life. Maybe invite a few friends over to watch a game. The normalcy of it all grounding me in a world that often felt unpredictable. I invited a few friends to my apartment, a handful of guys who had been part of my life for years. Among them was Matt. Matt was 27, one of those people who could charm a room but sometimes lacked a filter. A person who often tested the edges of social acceptability without realizing, or maybe without caring what he left behind in the process. He had been in my life long enough that I felt obligated to include him. Even if his presence occasionally made me uneasy, as the apartment filled with laughter. The sound of bottles clinking and chairs scraping against the floor. I couldn't help but notice the contrast between the life inside and the quiet, wintry day outside. The world seemed peaceful, safe, almost suspended. I was in my element, hosting, managing the flow of conversation, ensuring everyone had a drink in hand and a seat, that everyone felt welcome. But even in moments of calm, you can sense the potential for chaos. You can feel it lurking if you pay attention. And I suppose, in retrospect, I should have known that this evening would test the very things I valued most: trust, loyalty, the instinct to protect the people I care about. I spent some time pacing the apartment before the game started, checking that everything was set. The sun was slipping below the horizon, the room slowly dimming, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I liked the way the apartment felt in that light, warm, intimate, familiar. It was the kind of environment where you could let your guard down, where you could feel the simplicity of being with people who mattered. The first hints of tension were subtle, almost imperceptible. My mind wandered briefly to Alina, imagining her driving with Sofia, laughing over some small anecdote, maybe debating which loaf of bread was better. It struck me that these moments, these simple errands, were fleeting, fragile, and somehow sacred. I wanted to preserve them, to keep them insulated from the complications that so often arise in human interactions. I remember thinking, almost absent-mindedly, that life was comfortable in its simplicity, that we were fortunate to have these small islands of normalcy in a world that often felt reckless. And then, of course, life reminded me, in the most abrupt way possible, that normalcy is delicate, and boundaries are more fragile than we imagine, because even the most ordinary weekend can contain the seeds of chaos. And even the most well-intentioned actions can be misunderstood or manipulated. By the time Sofia and Alina returned, carrying the carefully wrapped Borodinsky bread-like treasures, the stage was already set for a confrontation I never expected. One that would test not just my patience, but my principles, my sense of morality, and my understanding of what it truly means to protect someone. The day Sofia and Alina decided to go to the bakery, the world outside was deceptively calm. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds hanging low, hinting at a storm that hadn't yet announced itself. I remember watching them drive off, the car disappearing down the quiet suburban street, their laughter still echoing faintly as the tires crunched over the gravel. I closed the door behind them, and the apartment felt empty for a moment to quiet, almost anticipating the small chaos that always seems to follow a weekend gathering. I had invited a few friends over for the game, just a handful, people I'd known since college, people I trusted. Matt was coming too, and while I didn't always enjoy his company, I felt an obligation. He had been a part of the group for years, a fixture of our gatherings, even if he occasionally made things awkward with his brash comments and unapologetic humor. I knew him well enough to sense the edges of his personality, but not enough to predict the exact moment he might cross a line. The apartment gradually came alive, the clatter of dishes being stacked, the sound of beer bottles opening, laughter spilling through the living room. It all felt normal, ordinary in the way that life can feel when nothing is wrong. I set up the television, making sure the game was ready, snacks laid out, drinks within easy reach. I even arranged the seating strategically, the way I always did, to make sure everyone had a good view, to encourage conversation, to maintain the casual, inviting atmosphere I prided myself on creating. And yet, even in these small, deliberate actions, I felt a subtle tension, a quiet anticipation, as though the universe itself was reminding me that order is always temporary. The apartment was warm, the lights soft, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floor, giving everything a sense of depth, a sense of life. I found comfort in these details, the way the light caught the edges of the furniture, the way the aroma of the snacks mingled with the faint scent of the outside air drifting through an open window by the time my friends arrived. The apartment was buzzing with the kind of energy that only comes when people gather for something simple, something communal. The game, of course, was secondary to the laughter, the chatter, the easy camaraderie that filled the room. I greeted each person at the door, exchanging hugs, handshakes, the kind of casual greetings that make you feel connected, part of a group that had weathered time together. Matt arrived later than the others. As usual, swaggering in with that half smile that always seemed just a little too subtle, as if the room owed him attention. I nodded at him, trying to read the room. He was already scanning for someone to engage, someone to direct his humor toward, and I felt that familiar knot of unease tighten in my stomach. Not yet, I thought. Not now. Meanwhile, Sophia and Alina returned from the bakery, the car pulling up just as the first half of the game was about to start. I could see them through the front window, laughing, the wind tousling their hair. Alina carried the bread carefully, as though it were precious, and Sophia's hand rested lightly on her back, guiding her gently. I opened the door for them, the scent of warm bread mingling with the faint winter air. The apartment immediately felt fuller, richer, more alive. I introduced Alina to everyone, mentioning that she was my cousin, taking care to highlight her connection to Sophia so that the group understood the family dynamic. She smiled politely, shyly, waving her hand as she greeted the room. I noticed how attentive she was, how her eyes flitted around the room, taking in the faces, the laughter, the casual chaos of the gathering. There was a serenity to her that I found comforting, the kind of calm that makes you feel protective instinctively. As the game started, the room settled into a rhythm. Voices rose and fell with the commentary, laughter punctuated with groans and cheers. I sat back on the couch, keeping a casual eye on my friends, while also observing Sophia and Alina. They had a quiet way of existing together, sharing small jokes, passing bread round, offering tastes of pastries they had brought. I felt a sense of satisfaction, seeing them happy, seeing them engaged in these little rituals that reminded me why family and chosen family matters so much. And yet, even as I sipped my drink and allowed myself a moment of relaxation, I could sense the subtle shifts, the undercurrents that often go unnoticed until it's too late. Matt was watching Alina, I realized suddenly, in that way that made me tighten in my chest. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me glance in his direction. He smiled too much, lingered too long. I shook it off, telling myself I was imagining things. Surely he wouldn't, not here, not in front of everyone. The room remained cheerful, but that tiny unease lingered at the edges of my awareness. It's funny how quickly the mind can become hyper-aware of details when you're protective of someone. Every glance, every laugh, every movement was filtered through this lens of caution. I found myself scanning the room unconsciously, measuring interactions, noting where people's hands rested, the way eyes met, the subtle cues that might indicate a breach of comfort. Sophia was oblivious, naturally so. She was engrossed in conversation with a friend, laughing at something I couldn't hear. Alina was content, adjusting to the social environment with her usual poise. I wanted to relax, to join in, to enjoy the game like everyone else. But there was a tension brewing, and I knew it, even if I couldn't yet see the exact form it would take. The first half of the game passed in this uneasy harmony. The laughter, the clatter, the commentary all blending with my low-level anxiety. I reminded myself to stay calm, to not overreact, to trust the environment I had created. But the protective instinct doesn't allow for calm reasoning when the object of that protection is someone like Alina. Vulnerable yet strong, aware yet trusting. It's a precarious balance, one that I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to navigate in a room full of friends with differing thresholds for social boundaries. By the time halftime arrived, I had made a silent mental note: watch him, watch Matt, and make sure that whatever happens, Alina feels safe. I knew that in the next hour, choices would need to be made, and the seemingly ordinary evening could very well unravel if I didn't pay attention. The second half of the game had just begun, and yet the apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary. There was a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable, the kind that makes your stomach tighten and your heart rate pick up without you fully realizing why. Matt was sitting near Alina, laughing a little too loudly, leaning a little too close. Every gesture, every glance, started to feel heavy under the weight of instinctive concern. I remember the exact moment. It was so ordinary, almost mundane, that if I had blinked, I might have missed it. Matt, with that careless grin of his, made a comment directed at Alina joke. He claimed, but one that immediately set my teeth on edge. Something about how he wanted to watch her walk around all night, and the room fell silent. I froze. Alina stiffened. Her fork paused midway to her mouth. She looked down, her cheeks flushed with something that wasn't embarrassment but a mix of shock, fear, and discomfort I couldn't ignore. Time slowed. The laughter, the commentary on the game, even the clatter of dishes, all of it seemed to vanish. I was acutely aware of every heartbeat, every flicker of expression on Alina's face. She had been talking about her college plans just moments ago, smiling, animated. And now she was caught in this sudden, uncomfortable spotlight. My blood boiled. "Did you just say that?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Matt's grin faltered, then returned with that self-assured arrogance. "What? It's legal? She's 18. Chill out, man. Legal." That single word made my skin crawl. It wasn't just about legality. It was about morality, about respect, about the boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, especially in my home, around someone I was responsible for. My mind raced. I could feel the anger rising, a surge of protectiveness I had tried to suppress, telling myself it wasn't the time, that I needed to be measured. But looking at Alina, seeing the discomfort etched into her face, I knew there was no room for hesitation. "You are not welcome in my home anymore. Leave, now," I said. My voice calm but firm, every word deliberate, every syllable heavy with the weight of authority. The room was still. My friends exchanged glances, unsure what had just occurred. Matt looked at me, shock and disbelief dancing across his features. "Come on, man, don't be ridiculous." I was joking. "You're overreacting." I felt no need to argue further. Words had no power here. This was about action, about principle. I stood, signaling with a gesture that there would be no discussion. He grabbed his coat, muttering, but he left. The door closed behind him with a definitive thud. And for the first time since the comment, the apartment exhaled. Alina sat quietly, still pale, still shaken. I knelt beside her, checking that she was okay, reassuring her without saying too much. Sophia joined me, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder, her eyes meeting mine with silent agreement. We had done the right thing, and yet the internal dialogue didn't stop. Even as the room slowly returned to normal, my mind replayed every second. Had I been too harsh? Could I have handled it differently? But every scenario I imagined came back to the same conclusion. Inaction would have been far worse. Alina would have remembered the room differently. She would have remembered Matt, not the warmth of the gathering, not the laughter, not the game. Later, when Matt posted on social media, claiming I had publicly humiliated him without reason, I felt a mixture of disbelief and frustration. His version of the story omitted the discomfort in Alina's eyes, the moral imperative that guided my action. To him, it was all a matter of overreaction. To me, it was the only option. Sophia reminded me gently but firmly, "You did the right thing." If you hadn't, Alina would have learned that men can make her feel uncomfortable without consequence. That statement settled in my mind. She was right. This wasn't just about Matt. It was about teaching respect, about reinforcing boundaries, about showing Alina that she could feel safe in her home, in the presence of people who cared for her. I thought about my friends, the ones who stayed, watching the subtle tension resolve. Some looked uncomfortable, unsure if they should intervene. Others simply nodded in agreement. Silent witnesses to a lesson that didn't need to be spoken aloud, that boundaries matter, that protection matters, that the safety of someone vulnerable outweighs social comfort. The rest of the evening passed in a cautious calm. The game continued, though I barely noticed the score. Conversation resumed, but the edge of the moment lingered in the air, a reminder of how quickly normalcy can be disrupted, how fragile the equilibrium of friendship and trust can be. And through it all, I reflected on the duality of responsibility. It's one thing to know the right thing, another entirely to act upon it when doing so risks upsetting social balance, when it means challenging someone who has been part of your life for years. Moral dilemmas aren't neat. They don't offer comfort. They offer clarity only after the choice has been made, leaving you to face the consequences, external or internal. Alina eventually smiled again, cautiously testing the waters of normal interaction. Sophia stayed close, protective but calm, and I realized something important in that moment. The measure of action is not in how it feels to you, but in how it preserves dignity and safety for others. Matt's discomfort was temporary, a minor blip. Alina's security, her trust, her sense of being protected, that was enduring. I spent the rest of the night observing quietly, letting conversations flow around me, checking in subtly, making sure comfort was restored. I realized that leadership, in this sense, is quiet but decisive. It doesn't demand applause. It demands responsibility, and as I replay the evening in my mind, I understand why these moments are etched so clearly in memory. It isn't just about a confrontation. It's about defining who you are in the presence of moral challenges, about choosing integrity over social ease, about prioritizing the vulnerable over the comfortable. By the time everyone left, the apartment was quiet again, the storm outside finally breaking in muted raindrops against the windows. I looked at the empty chairs, at the lingering smell of bread and snacks, and felt a profound sense of resolve. I had acted according to principle. I had protected someone who mattered, and I would do it again every single time. The morning after the confrontation, the apartment felt empty in a different way. The physical space was quiet, but the weight of what had occurred hung in the air like a lingering fog. I had spent the night replaying every detail in my mind, questioning every nuance of my actions. Had I been too harsh? Was there a way to maintain both the dignity of my friends and the safety of Alina? The answers felt fleeting, elusive, like shadows just beyond my reach. Then came the notifications Matt had posted on social media. The words were carefully crafted, deliberately misleading, designed to paint me as unreasonable, as aggressive, as someone who had publicly humiliated a longtime friend. I stared at the screen, feeling an immediate mix of disbelief and anger. Every post, every comment from his side of the story completely ignored the discomfort he had caused Alina. It was as if her experience didn't exist, as if my protective instincts were somehow overstepping invisible boundaries of social propriety. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just about social media. It was about perception, about how actions are interpreted outside the immediate context. In one post, he wrote that I had overreacted and turned a joke into a personal attack. Other friends chimed in, some questioning my behavior, others expressing support without fully understanding the situation. The room of silent judgment I had feared now seemed to stretch across the digital world. Sophia noticed my tension immediately. She placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, the touch grounding me in the present. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Her voice was steady, calm, full of conviction. "If you hadn't, Alina would have learned that men can make her feel uncomfortable, and it would have been our responsibility to let it happen. You acted. That's what matters." Her words anchored me. I realized she was right not just about the immediate situation, but about the broader principle. Protection is never inconvenient when it matters. Morality isn't determined by popularity or convenience. It's determined by action, by the courage to uphold the safety and dignity of those who cannot fully defend themselves. Even so, the fallout was more complicated than I had anticipated. Friends I thought I could trust began questioning my decision. Some argued that I had overstepped, that social dynamics required a more nuanced approach. Others were silent, unwilling to pick sides, but clearly affected by the tension. I spent hours reading and rereading the posts, analyzing every comment, every tone, every implied accusation. The mental fatigue was palpable, but so was the certainty in my conviction. Alina, thankfully, seemed unaware of the online storm. She moved through the apartment with quiet grace, focusing on her studies and small routines. I was relieved by her composure, but I also understood that part of my responsibility was shielding her from the ripple effects of Matt's actions. The digital world is merciless, capable of distorting intentions and magnifying misunderstandings. I reflected on Matt's perspective, trying to dissect it without justifying it. He had framed the situation as a joke, legal and harmless, a minor misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But legality is not morality. Humor is not consent, and comfort, especially in the home of someone who has become family, is paramount. The challenge of navigating social relationships is knowing when a line has been crossed and having the courage to enforce it, even when others resist. Sophia and I discussed the situation at length. We talked about boundaries, about trust, about the responsibilities that come with being part of a family, chosen or otherwise. Sometimes, she said, people don't see the world as we do. They react to inconvenience or embarrassment, not to ethics or empathy. That's not our fault. We act according to what's right, not what's convenient. Her perspective gave me clarity. I began to understand that the fallout, uncomfortable as it was a necessary consequence of standing up for someone else. Social discomfort, misunderstandings, accusations, they are temporary. Safety, trust, dignity, they are lasting. And that knowledge, crystallized through the experience, became a lens through which I could examine not just Matt's behavior, but my own responses to moral dilemmas in the future. The situation also made me reconsider my circle of friends. Loyalty is tested not in moments of ease, but in moments of challenge. I realized that true friendship requires respect for boundaries, for ethics, for the unspoken agreements that hold relationships together. Those who could not acknowledge that, who preferred social comfort or self-interest over morality, were people I would need to evaluate carefully moving forward. Throughout the day, I wrote notes to myself, documenting every thought, every reaction, every detail of the evening prior. I needed to understand it fully, to prepare for any potential escalation, to ensure that future decisions would be informed by reflection rather than impulse. The process was exhausting, but it was necessary. Moral clarity rarely comes without effort, and then, quietly, I felt a small measure of relief. Alina was safe. Sophia and I were aligned. The immediate threat had been neutralized. The social storm, while unavoidable, could not undo the principle that guided my actions. It was a reminder that integrity is often tested in visible ways, but its value lies in the unseen outcomes, the confidence of someone protected, the reassurance of someone vulnerable, the knowledge that in the face of discomfort or resistance, you chose correctly. By the evening, I felt the tension beginning to ease, though not disappear. The digital chatter continued, but it no longer had the power to disturb me deeply. I knew that confrontation, while difficult, had clarified the nature of my relationships and strengthened my understanding of responsibility. And as I looked out the window at the city below, lights flickering against the encroaching night, I understood a profound truth. Consequences are inevitable, both online and offline, but standing up for what is right, protecting those who cannot fully protect themselves, and acting with clarity and courage, those are the actions that define us. Long after the noise of social opinion has faded, the apartment was quiet again. The storm had passed, leaving only the soft patter of rain against the windows and the faint scent of damp earth drifting inside. I sat on the couch, alone this time, letting the weight of the past few days settle around me. The confrontation, the fallout, the hours of reflection, it all felt like a lifetime compressed into a single, unforgettable weekend. I thought about Alina. I thought about how fragile yet resilient she had been throughout the ordeal. She had lost her mother, a void that no one could fill, and yet she trusted us to protect her, to uphold her sense of safety, even in the smallest details. That trust was sacred, and I realized more than ever that protecting it was not a burden, it was an honor. Sophia sat beside me without saying a word at first. She placed her hand over mine, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. She didn't need to comment on the arguments online, the accusations, or Matt's distorted version of events. We both understood what had happened, why it had happened, and what it meant for the people we cared about. Alignment, I realized, was a kind of quiet victory. I replayed the confrontation in my mind again, not with anxiety, but with clarity. Every decision I had made, every instinct I had followed, had been rooted in principle, in the understanding that some lines, once crossed, demand action. In moments like that, hesitation is complicity, silence is betrayal. I had chosen to act, to prioritize dignity and safety over comfort and social ease, and in doing so, I had reaffirmed who I am and who I hope to be. The social fallout had its own lessons. Not everyone understood, not everyone agreed. Some friends had questioned me, others had remained silent. But that was the reality of moral action. It often invites scrutiny, it challenges convenience, it forces reflection. True friendship, I realized, is tested not by the ease of shared laughter, but by the courage to uphold boundaries and respect, even when it risks temporary discomfort. I thought about the world outside my apartment, the broader implications of moments like this. How often do we turn a blind eye, rationalize a comment, ignore the unease of someone younger or more vulnerable because it's inconvenient to act? The lessons I had learned were small in scope, but immense in significance. Protecting someone's comfort and safety isn't optional, it's essential. And when we fail to act, even minor lapses can ripple outward in ways we cannot anticipate. Alina, I realized, would remember this weekend, not for Matt's inappropriate comment, not for the online drama, but for the fact that someone stood up for her when it mattered. She would remember that she could trust the people around her, that she could rely on Sophia and me, that her sense of safety was a priority, not an afterthought. That realization gave me a profound sense of relief, but also a renewed commitment. Protecting others is not a singular act. It is ongoing, continuous, and deliberate. I also reflected on the nature of confrontation itself. It is never comfortable. It is never neat. It often leaves a residue of doubt and tension, even when we know deep down that our actions were justified. But morality is rarely tidy. Courage is messy, imperfect, and sometimes misunderstood. The strength of principle is not measured by applause or agreement, but by the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you acted according to your conscience. Sophia and I discussed the future, not just in terms of friendships or social gatherings, but in terms of how we would continue to navigate the complexities of family, trust, and boundaries. We spoke about communication, about vigilance, about the subtle ways in which protection can be exercised without suffocating those we care about. It was a conversation rooted in experience, in reflection, in a desire to grow stronger and wiser together. And yet, even as I embraced these lessons, I recognized the lingering tension. Life rarely offers neat resolutions. Friends may drift, opinions may clash, and social media may amplify misunderstandings. But integrity, once exercised, leaves a permanent mark not on the world, but on the self. I could sleep knowing that my actions, however misunderstood by some, had preserved dignity, safety, and trust. That, I realized, is more valuable than temporary comfort or agreement. Looking back, I understood something essential. Life is measured not by the absence of conflict, but by how we respond to it. The test is not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them decisively, ethically, with courage and clarity. Alina's trust, Sophia's alignment, and my own moral compass had been tested, and in that testing I found strength. Strength in conviction, strength in empathy, strength in knowing that doing the right thing is rarely convenient but always necessary. The night drew on, quiet and reflective. I listened to the rain pattering against the windows, felt the warmth of the apartment, the calm after the storm. I knew that the challenges of life would continue, that new dilemmas would arise. and that moments of discomfort would test the limits of my principles again. But I also knew that the lessons of this weekend, the clarity of action, the value of protection, the responsibility of moral courage would remain with me, guiding each decision, each interaction, each step forward. In the end, the apartment felt alive once more, not with the noise of confrontation, but with the quiet reassurance of integrity upheld. And as I gazed out into the city, I realized that some victories are invisible. They are not celebrated publicly, nor recorded in social media posts. They exist in the unspoken trust of those we protect, in the alignment of conscience and action, in the knowledge that, when it mattered most, we chose to stand firm, to act, and to uphold what is right.